Very good afternoon, everyone, and thanks for all those who join us today. And I can tell and I can see that we have a lot of people from the UK, Europe, Middle East, and even beyond. So a warm welcome for everyone, and thanks very much for the invite by Urban Design Group. My name is Husam Waer. I am from architecture and urban planning background with big hat on sustainability. I work for the University of Dundee as a reader, but also I am associate with two big practices in the UK. I am part of the Urban Design Group Executive Committee as well. Today, I am going to talk about really a timely subject, an old/new. It's not really a new subject. 20 minutes neighborhood or 10 minutes or 15, it's really not a new subject. It's an old phenomena. It has been revisited recently on the back of the COVID and also climate challenges and so on. The talk, yes, will raise a lot of issues to do with the UK, but a lot of the lessons are transferable elsewhere because there are a lot of similarity. But it's as well based on some of the ongoing research I have established over the last 3 or 4 years on the back of the Civic Urban Design Laboratory in Dundee, and I will say something about it later on, but also on my current research with Dr. Ian Cooper. He is as well with us. We're just writing a range of publications around the subject, and which will be published soon, and we would be more than happy to share it with you. Now, very crucial, if I may say, I am not going to claim I will have the answers for everything. In fact, I might raise questions and concerns more than really an answers or a solution per se. The talk is not going to be fully academic, no at all, because I do engage heavily with governments and different organizations and NGOs and even with RIBA and Royal Town Planning Institute, with my colleague in the Academy of Urbanism, Urban Design Group. So the talk will bring practice, policy, theory, but also my observations and reflections. And it is, as I said, it's really, we have tested a lot of this idea and thoughts on the ground, working with colleagues in local authorities here in Scotland, but also recently working with Damascus in Syria as well around the subject itself. So we're going to reflect on that. Now, let me start my talk now with this interesting statement. Change is the only constant in life. As you can see, we live in a very moving environment at the moment. The war in Ukraine, the current food crisis, energy crisis, climate repair and emergence, the health inequality and injustice, the change in our lifestyle, the personal, politicians, the technology, legislations. So the questions, where do we belong when everything is in the move? Now, place doesn't matter at all. Actually, the priority is shifted. The priority now is shifted with the current inflation worldwide, with the current energy price, food, and so on. Today is the priority now for a lot of politicians, decision makers, or even local authorities. Yes, we know quite well, medium and long term is really important. We do acknowledge that, but who cares and who is responsible? Yes, we all know the SDGs and this colorful sheet, the 17 goals. But what does that mean to the localism? What does that mean to local neighborhoods? What does that mean to some of the most deprived neighborhood here in Scotland or in the UK? And what I want to mention here, it's not enough if we are truly honest about delivering sustainability. It's not enough just to talk about number 11, which is to do with sustainable cities and communities, without really bridging the gaps with other key dimensions and issues, especially number 12 in terms of being responsible for consumptions and production, which I will refer to later on, the importance of good health and well-being, number 3, or climate change or climate action, number 13, or number 7 now, affordability and clean energy. So silo busting is really become a key. And the only way to do that if we work in a diverse teams, because we need diverse teams to see those blind spots. It's no longer about the market on its own. It's no longer about the planning on its own or planning system on its own. It's partnership and collaboration. Hence, we have that's number 17, which is important. Here in the UK, we do have a risk scenario. The economy of the UK is the sum of total of economies of each neighborhood, town, city, and even region. And the underperforming national economy is the sum total of its underperforming neighborhood economy. It's not enough to talk about economy only from national perspective or regional perspective. We really need to start talking about cities, towns, and neighborhood level. If economy, environment, and social performance is to improve, there need to be change at really neighborhood level, which I'm not sure whether we really talk about it that much. We have got into a mindset of thinking about planning and urban design merely in terms of providing housing or schools and shops. It is also about the consumptions of goods and services. There needs to be change. We need to think about sustainable production. Localism is about producing things locally, but also consumptions locally, rather than relying on elsewhere. This is another challenge. House builders in the UK, at least for the last 30 years or so, are focused primarily on the delivering of houses. Normally, they call them units, and they are obsessed with numbers and don't retain normally a long-term investment. Why? They want a quick in and they want in 2-3 years quick out. But the problem, any bad decision like low density, the community will inherit the consequences of that socially, economically, and environmentally. Also, there is limited power of competition now in the UK to incentivize and drive up quality. There is no incentive now, especially in the market and the market system, to drive up quality and deliver better houses, better neighborhood. Failure to bring about a greater diversity, which really lead to failure to bring about a greater diversity and choices for customer and consumers. We don't give choices and multiple choices. Development as well, established model of risk and reward are so buried in the banking, public sector's recruitment, and construction, even industry, that in the absence of demonstrated viable alternatives, they will blow on until they fail. In fact, the prevailing terms and conditions underpinning sometimes developments may prove hard to change, and people sometimes will not accept the change. They feel the system is fine and there is no need to change. Yes, the pandemic, to me, now we talk about 10 or 20 minutes neighborhood. We shouldn't become obsessed about the numbers. But what is interesting about the pandemic, it shows us the importance of how do we live locally? Can we enjoy living and working locally within the first 1800 meters? Especially the pandemic in the affluent neighborhoods in the UK, people start rediscovering their locality by interactions with local shops or green park or civic spaces if available, and interacting with their neighbors. They create what we call it neighborliness, which we have missed over the last 30 or 40 years. But unfortunately, this was not the case in deprived neighborhood. This was not where people were not able to access green park or active hybrid local shops and so on. So this is about, to me, how do we enjoy living well locally? So this is as well show the importance of the power of nearness. It's not a new concept. Well, let me show you how in the UK, the concept being defined. Scottish government in the new national planning framework number 4, which will come soon, they said 20 minutes neighborhood is a method of achieving connected and often compact neighborhoods. So absolutely compactness at the heart of it, in such way that people can meet the majority of their daily needs with a reasonable walk, wheel, or cycle. So within approximately 800 meters of their home. So that's about 10 minutes there and 10 minutes back. So 10 minutes to go there and 10 minutes to come back. That's the 20 minutes. Such trends in the UK, they said it's about ensuring that it is easy for people to meet most of their everyday needs by a short, convenient, but also pleasant. So experience is very important on the 20 minutes return walk. So as you can see, if you look at the criteria, the principle of the 20 minutes neighborhood, they are at the heart of the SDGs. But to me, it's how do we live well locally? The Scottish government tried to adopt, they have adopted the concept now, and it will be part of their legislations. Now, they link that with can we really use it to decrease health inequality? Can you use it to improve local production, local economy at neighborhood level? Can we use it as a way to tackle as well climate action by encourage more active travel, but also improve livability and also quality of life? So it is really about getting the basic rights, which we all know and people talk about it for 100 years. There is argument about the 20 minutes neighborhood. Let me tell you, there is fear. There is fear in especially from English contexts, that 20 minutes neighborhood might compete with the role of the city center, which I will talk about it later on. There is a fear that if you start activate the power of the economy in the neighborhood level, this might be in a competition with the city center. This is not true. This is not the case in city like Freiburg or some of them of German cities, where they distribute the economy and the economic power between the city center and the neighborhood centers. It's really all about the 20 minutes neighborhood. Is not only about the transportation. It's not about linking A to B. It's about livability. How do we access services, health care, schools, and so on? How do we give more local choices, restaurants, specialist services, shops, community centers, community anchors, grocery, but also how do we, where it is possible, to activate travel to create more and promote more active travel and link it with health and well-being. But also it's more about density and mixing things, so giving more diversity of houses, less land take where is this possible. I will talk about this later on, fewer car trips, but more importantly, how do we really reduce our aggregate carbon dioxide? But there is no one-size-fit approach. We need to be very careful. There is no one-size-fit approach, and there is questions about identity. Can we create more localized sense of community, sense of self and community? Of course, the aspiration is nice, but yes, there is high degree of complexity involved in the description of 20 minutes neighborhood, in the sense of the diversity of decision and action, and who is going to do what, and who own it. As you can see, you have real estate, economy, urban design, planning, legislations, and there is sometimes different political and social culture in which this form of planning activity can be undertaken. So we need to acknowledge that our places are messy. And sometimes it's good to acknowledge the importance of mess. But this and sometimes messy lead to fuzziness and complexity, and sometimes difficult even to understand or unpack or even deliver. This will require collective endeavor, need passionate, need relationship, need helping each others. One of the recent statistics I looked at in Greater Britain, those who usually travel to work by car, this is the map showing those who used to travel by car, by region in Greater Britain. Unfortunately, there is no recent study. This is up to 2019. as you can see, beyond London, wow, 70 up to 80% of people using the car. So beyond London, this is for the regions. London around 27%. No wonder why, because they have one of the most sophisticated underground transport system. I need to highlight as well. So on average, 70% of people use the car to work in Greater Britain. This is an interesting statistics here. Imagine, guys, 20% of British journeys are under 1 mile by car. This could be, by the way, guys, a distance easily cycled or could be walked in around 5 or 10 minutes max. 30%, 38%, that's around 40%. This is, to me, quite important statistics of British journeys under 2 miles are made by car or van. This is, to me, a distance easily could be cycled in around 10 minutes or walkable could be in 15 minutes or 20 minutes sometimes. And 55% of British journeys are under 5 miles and made by car. A distance easy could be cycled, or if there is active, frequent, reliable public transportation could be used. So we really need to start looking at those statistics seriously, the 20% and 30%, 38%. In Scotland, by the way, the 38% is 40%. We really need to start, if we are really serious about reducing carbon dioxide, we need to start looking at walkability and cycling and public transportation seriously in order to work, to convince people not to use the car for 1 mile or even 2 miles. This will require getting the fundamental rights, because if you look at the way we build cities these days, it's about fast movement of goods, transportation, people, products, import, export. We need to start really, we need to start looking at the circular economy seriously. This will require, how do we control the inputs coming to the cities, and also how do we control the outputs from the cities itself and its activities. In the past, in the old days, cities and towns, especially UK and beyond, used to be an ecological. There was a relationship between the ecology and the ecosystem. They work in harmony. They work with each other. So towns and cities used to be self-contained, where we produce everything locally, we eat everything locally, and we consume locally. But there is a relationship between the economy and as well the ecosystem. That's what my colleague helped. He called them agropoles. Now, this is what happened with the capitalism, which is everywhere the last 50, 60, or 100 years ago. We forget that concept, the relationship. We now bring our food, our resources, our materials, we bring them from nowhere. And this really affects the health, not also health of the well-being, health of the planet itself. Of course, I am not against this idea of connection, and connections with the world absolutely is important. But maybe we need to make a balance between the two. Absolutely, we need to learn. We need to be part of other and sharing and helping each others worldwide. But also, we need to activate the role of localism, especially in terms of how we produce and things locally, including knowledge, including local economy. Why everything has to be big, guys? How about local economy, small economy based on 1 or 2 or up to 5 or 4 people? Neighborhoods, to me, has a big role to play, but also this has to work in harmony with the ecosystem, with nature. There is a big potential here for me to produce even energy locally, or even enjoying your life and the relationship with nature and the blue water locally. So no-brainer to me, 20 minutes neighborhood is about activating the role of localism. But also we need to move away from this idea of take, make, produce, release CO2 into more circular urbanism, which is all about how do we minimize pollution and waste and so on. But also, we need to appreciate the hierarchy of local, neighborhood, city center, region level. rather than boil it down to one size fits all. Absolutely, this is a crucial understanding and appreciating this hierarchy. Maybe things are not accessible by the first 10 minutes, my colleague. Not everything in the UK would be accessible in 10, 15 minutes. Might be. So this is why sometimes it might be accessible beyond the first 10 or 15 minutes. It might be in the city center, or it might be in the region. So transportation has a big role to play, but also defining the relationship between cities level, neighborhood level, agriculture, countryside, and forest as well. I am worried in the UK about future food production and future productive agriculture land. We need to have less land intake and preserve our land for future generation, especially when it's come to agriculture, productions, food, and so on. This will require, to me, a new way of thinking and also having a defined relationship. And let us put it this way, guys. Distance always demands transport. And distance will always demand more land take. And the consequences, you end up with more pollution. To the left-hand side, this is how, in a way or another, we build cities in the UK. We focus our resources, our investment, and our money into the city center. And we assume if the center flourishes, everywhere else in the city and beyond will flourish. Don't get me wrong, to some extent, that's true. But the problem with that, you make that center so attractive, and you don't, and so all people will aspire to, all people will move into, including those who live in suburbia. And it does encourage sprawl, because eventually you get very busy, dense city center. People will prefer to live at the edge of the city. This is to the left-hand side. Meanwhile, to the right-hand side, which is in a way or another what they did in city like Freiburg or Leipzig. No, they said, okay, we need to have a distinct city center, absolutely distinct in terms of what offer, in terms of heritage activities, theaters, cinemas, and big green parks, and so on. But they said equally, we need to make balance. We need to invest in as well the power and the economy of the neighborhoods. So our cities should be a city of connected, vibrant neighborhoods, should be a city of short distance. By doing so, to the right-hand side, you shorten the distance. So people will not necessarily all aspire to use the center, attacking it by car. Instead, no, you activate the role of the neighborhood, and you make balance on how you distribute the resources and consume the resources in the fairly and equally between those centers. So there is something about here, equity as well, equity dimension, especially now, to me, no-brainer now. In Scotland now and in the UK, a lot of people post-pandemic now prefer to work from home. So living and working and playing, becoming a way or another reality. But we need to emphasize this. We need to make it better if we are serious about it. And shortening distances is really very key. And this is the sketch to the left-hand side on the top. This is Freiburg, the first sketch they did around more than 20 years ago, how they want to create what they call it a place of short distance. And the question was how do we support the creation of self-sufficient walkable or cyclable places or 20 minutes neighborhood? Recently, city of Utrecht in Netherlands, they adopted the concept itself, and they really start now. They want to achieve this concept of 20 minutes neighborhood. By the way, they call it 10. And they highlighted where should be the core of the neighborhoods, and how do we create an inclusive Utrecht to everyone. And they start now putting their resources alongside the main railway system and reliable public transportations. They want to densify their neighborhoods and the city center in those core neighborhoods. But they want the city for everyone, a home for everyone, working for everyone, amenities for everyone, and mobility for everyone. So it's become a city for everyone. So you're not really excluding anyone. Now, I'm sure you might tell me, well, how about rural contexts? How about suburban contexts? Absolutely, it's not an easy subject. There is no one-size-fits approach. Recently now, in Scotland, there is a huge debate about when you have a very few people with low density, especially in rural contexts and suburban contexts as well, with low density and fewer people, what can we do? Can we activate the role of what they call it 20 minutes community, by the way, not necessarily neighborhood? And the answer is why now? Can we really create what they call it cluster villages where we link those neighborhoods, where they start sharing resources and create shared circular economy, so everyone will benefit. To do so, you may have to have a hub which has a reliable public transportation connected with those different clusters. So the answers in here, connectivity is key. Physical connectivity and social connectivity is key. But what I like about this kind of studies now, it's activate the circular economy and create more trust, more sharing, but also it start unpacking the potential of the land and also underutilized spaces and underutilized library activities and so on. Colleagues down Velocity, they did this study for Oxford, so it's in England, where they start really see, can we make most of what we have between and among those little villages? So can I get benefit from a neighboring villages where they may have a nursery or a market or sport halls or swimming pool or library? But I repeat myself, the challenge with this is connectivity and how can we shorten the distance if possible? Because if you don't have a critical mass, my friend, it will be so hard for local authorities or government invest in even a small bus stop. So critical massing is very key in here. Hence, linkages and making connectivity between those different clusters should help creating that cluster critical mass in order to activate the role of public transportation. So this is the study on Oxford, actually, by the Velo cities, trying to create a clustering villages concept. But even now, they take this concept so seriously in Denmark itself by creating whole life clusterings and investing in different typologies and languages. But the whole idea is, how do we make most of what we have and how do we share the resources so everyone will benefit? Neighborhood as a definition, absolutely fuzzy concept. Kevin Lynch referred to the concept how people refer to it differently. It could be unit of social analysis. It could be defined spatial unit. In the UK, neighborhood could be associated with the catchment of services or elementary school. I really like this quote by David Brooks. He said one day, it could be that the neighborhood, not the individual, is the essential unit of social change. If you are trying to improve lives, maybe you have to think about changing many elements of a single neighborhood in a systematic way at steady pace. David Sim from Gale Office, he said one day, which I really found it interesting, neighborhood is not a place. It is a state of mind. So he is trying to focus on the psychology of how we perceive the place, the importance of social dimension and interaction. A neighborhood, one in which our hearts are open, we connected with others, we care with each other. It's have a sense of pride. It has a sense of neighborliness. It is the unique spirit of neighborhood or place or genius loci. Genius loci. So we need to start really taking those criteria so seriously if we are serious about the 20 minutes neighborhood. It's about spirituality of the place. how we perceive it. It's about the physicality of the place, the measurable materiality. It's about the collectivities, which is about sharing, significant share. It is what I call it, the conviviality. But also, it has to be functional, which has a tangible and intangible context. In his book, David Sim referred to the ideas cities has to be a connected neighborhood. He referred to the concept of softness. We need to bring softness to our cities and its neighborhood in terms of the diversity of the built environment we provide, outdoor spaces, the flexible spaces now. More than ever now in the UK, we need the flexible places for people to work, entertain, and enjoy. The importance of a human scale, walkability, sense of control, greater biodiversity, and so on. What is the big idea, guys? Especially now with the current recession in the UK and beyond, the current economic environment, the current energy crisis. What is the big idea for the new neighborhood or the existing one or the new extension or the infill? Does it connect to local destinations? There is major failure of oversupply, but also really poor quality. See what you have now. This is, by the way, from the UK, those pictures. Can anyone tell me what is that, guys? What is that? 40% of the pictures you see now is really to do with road engineer, is really to do with hard services, hard infrastructure. It's all about car orientations. In fact, the green you see is leftover spaces. In fact, on those spaces, you see 0 ATM machine, 0 bus stop, 0 amenity, 0 services. That's exactly the statistics, what you see. And this is exactly what I found out. It's 40% road and parkings. Even the payments provided is to do with parking regime. The gardens are very private gardens. They don't contribute to the overall character, and the buildings, just if I may say, they call them units. They are not dwellings. If you look at what happens to everything around us has improved and changed. The music productions, the kitchens layouts, the motor car, the houses hasn't changed. In fact, what the houses we built are very low quality in comparison with what we used to deliver 50 or 100 years ago. And this is the advantage of the big house builders and what they deliver. The advantage of we lost the neighborliness, massive decline in public health, poor accessibility often, very low density, limited investment, because when you have a very low dense, there is no rationale for investing in the area. Always associated with congestions, because it's so car-oriented, and low, even sometimes very limited public transportation. And recent studies show in pandemic and post-pandemic, the majority of these kind of houses related to social isolations as well. But here we go. The people who think the system work for the system. You have some people, they keep telling you, wow, nothing wrong with that model. That's model to the right-hand side, nothing wrong with it. But the system isn't broken. It was built this way. We do need a new narrative. And I would like to read this quote. If people live in houses, where do the houses live? If they are homeless, all we are left with is a typical endless, futureless suburbia. And me and Ian, we really raise some interesting questions. How does zone planning contribute to the delivery of 20 minutes neighborhood? Let me show you this. The problem with the way we built the hierarchy road system, and we reduce them to what I call them a collection of specialist bods with each use, whether it's a shopping centers or community facilities or business park or school or housing state, conceived as a separate components or entity with its own car park provision, and usually enjoying its own individual exclusive access to a collector or main distributor routes. Such roads are normally are not really suitable for sustainable movement or active travel. Plus, the way the zoning concept we still use in the UK led to what I call it homogeneity in land use, which has been seen as a contributing to segregation, monofunctional, imbalance in jobs, imbalance in houses, the distribution, really leading to more commuting by cars, resulting in air pollution and congestions. We don't see the built environment in multifunctional way, or rather it's always monofunctional on large land. We need to start diversifying how we use the land with creating more linkages, more value. And this is the problem with these kind of systems, the one I refer to, whether it is the pods, patterns, or even the cul-de-sacs, by the way, developments. The problem with those, they are impermeable. They discourage connectivity. They are not permeable. And this will really affect patterns of movement within the area. So yes, I am very worried. That's the concept of 20 minutes neighborhood for especially existing low density neighborhood might not work at all. Why? Just because connectivity and making the area or the area making connectivity just not an option whatsoever, or it might be so expensive. The road engineer concept of a tree-like street network is widely accepted for the last 40 or 50 years. That's really resulted in unconnected, illegible, and often unserved streets network, and an ambiguous relation between public and private realm. That's exactly what happened with the concept of tree-like streets. This disconnected street patterns with the cul-de-sacs. I really like these diagrams. This is exactly the big house builders in the UK, what they do. This is exactly what they do. They put the road first and the houses come later. And they assume that 20 to 22 meters between the houses are to do with the privacy. Trust me, colleagues, it is to do with car movability, but also there is an interesting thing. It's to do as well with emergency vehicles access, services, and delivery. So there is something to do with the scale and issues. I'm not sure whether this is all to do with privacy. When you ask private sectors, the majority to do with car orientation and also the importance of resolving emergency vehicles, access, services, and delivery. And this is the result of what we end up, which you see all over the places in the UK, in Europe, and even some part of the Middle East now. We really need to start appreciating how the built environment meet the streets. We have lost the concept of blot and block and how the block meet the streets and the interrelationship between the streets and the houses. And as I said, I am just very worried. The concept of 20 minutes neighborhood for existing neighborhoods, especially those built over the last 30 or 40 years in suburbia and in rural contexts, might be really not possible, or they might require interventions beyond planning, architecture, and urban design. It may have a set of measures involving compulsory purchasing of private land, or sometimes it may have a political decisions. Just connections and establishing connectivity is not an option whatsoever. And by the way, 20 minutes neighborhood, not necessarily about abandoning or removing the car totally, no at all, but it's about more giving choices for people to access places through walking, through cycling, and yes, reducing the vehicle use to support community and place making. So we're not advocating you should remove totally the car. That will be more or less impossible. But how do we reduce the trip, especially the first, if you remember, the first mile or 2 miles as well? Those to me is really becoming so important. So how do we can provide sustainable connection physical, but also services to join up neighborhood to the town, city, and to the wider connections. An interesting concept emerged as well recently. My colleague in Aston Smith Lord, they have done a very interesting study, practical study on how to create from Glasgow city center become overlapped neighborhood. So things not necessarily are in isolation, no at all. Things may overlap, and that to me has an advantage because each neighborhood may have a different set of services and facilities. But to activate the rule of the overlap neighborhood, connectivity, the social and physical connectivity has to work so people could easily move around and get about. So that's an interesting as well concept. A recent study in Scotland showed that a really very sophisticated survey revealed the factors which would be an important when people choose where to live. Wow, 75% said they would like to move to a place where they would be able to walk to a local shops or facilities. 65% said they could walk to a regular bus service. Around 45% a train station or a place to work or to study, 31%. Interestingly, around 25% said they would be willing to cycle if the route is safe. But also the study showed that the duration would be prepared to walk less than 10 minutes. About 55% they said they would be willing to walk for less than 10 minutes if there is nearest shops and sales every day. Me and Robert, we have fantastic discussions around this. Affordability is key. We met a lot of people. Affordability. Local shops has to be affordable and diverse. Affordable and diverse. Because if they are so expensive and they are not diverse to meet different needs and demands for different types of community, people will prefer to use the car and to go to a cheapest large shop centers like Lidl and Aldi. So yes, affordability is very, very key in this case. And can we facilitate this? Can the built environment professionals facilitate this? I think the answer we can, especially if we start talking more about local productions. So you really produce more local and you give more local choices and so on. Now, this is to me a good question. What kind of density and intensity of uses we need to deliver the 20 minutes neighborhood? My friend, density is very complex subject, very fuzzy subject. And wow, in the UK, people perceive it differently. Please, my colleague, density is not about building more smaller units. Density is not necessarily about living in massive towers or in high-rise buildings. No, at all. We shouldn't be literal about density. But I agree with you, density is really understood differently by different people. So there is no hard and fast rules on how to deal with density. There is different definitions. In a spatial sense, sometimes it might be defined as a number of units in a given area. Sometimes could be described to predict and control the use of land. Wow, this is to me is important. Sometimes the way people perceive density, whether it is high or medium or low in any context, can influence how they behave. That's quite interesting. And how they respond emotionally to others as well as to their surrounding. I have visited many examples in Europe, in the UK, and sometimes really I feel so comfortable with high density, but it's the way we use density around the place. And I will show some example around it. It has important impact on things like quality of life, but also really has a big impact on our mental and physical well-being. What low density for some is high density to others. So it has to do with the place-specific solutions. So to me, density is more visual rather than numerical. I really like this quote. Density is an outcome, not determined. It should really evolve as a consequences of correlating intensity of occupation and uses with accessibility and proximity to facility and services. I will say something around this important statement later on. What I am trying to say, you cannot see density in isolation from intensity of uses, occupation, but also the accessibility and the proximity to facilities and services. We should correlate those together if we are serious about delivering better places. Density could be measured to me and in terms of number of units per units or dwelling per hectare, but also the number of people per hectare, intensity of occupations, or even the capital expenditure per hectare. We really need to be very serious about how much we spend per hectare in comparison with how many people will live there and how many dwellings we build there, especially within the current economic environment. So the cost per people becoming to me is key to understand density. Let me show you a quick example to a city called Perth in Scotland. This is Perth, what they call it, maps in 1860 for about 30,000 people. You could say it was a bit very dense at that time. Maybe it was a bit overcrowded, especially with shanty towns where 6-7 people used to live in one unit. So that might be crowded. My colleague, density is different from crowdness. We need to be careful. If we say we need more medium or high density, this is not necessarily creating a crowdness. This is Perth in so this is 1860, this is Perth in 1900. Wow, more or less the same people, a bit fewer, but with more sprawl now, especially with the booming of industry and innovation growth as well. This is 1930. 35,000 people, only they add 6,000, but see how the sprawl start expanding dramatically. 1950, 1970, I don't have the exact numbers, but it was more or less around 35,000. This is 1980. Wow, my colleague. This is 2020. Imagine, this is Perth in 2020. They added only around 17 or 18,000 people. Just look at the footprint, the house's footprint. So within 150 years or 160 years, the city only managed to attract or managed to have around 17,000 people extra, and just to show the massive urban sprawl beyond the city center. So no brainer, we need to start thinking about intensity mixed uses when it's come to the subject of density. And that's nothing new. That's what the Sir Richard Rogers advocate for us when it's come to the concept of compact neighborhoods. How, yes, we give people then multi-choices, guys. Choices here and diversifying choices. Absolutely fine. I'm not against people who would like to have their own private garden and their own driveway. But let us diversify the system, especially what Richard Rogers advocate here. If you have main reliable tram system or train system or bus systems, you densify houses alongside that systems, and you have more mixed activity between offices, shops, and houses. But beyond that, gradually, you may have end up with a bit lower density, but all are connected and walkable within the first 800 meters and so on. So not all houses looks the same, and not all houses are the same size. You diversifying to meet different needs. So you have mixed working areas. Sometimes you have higher density houses and some working as well with different facilities and services. But also he advocate for linkages. Not everything has to be within locality. He advocate as well to create different relationship between different neighborhoods as well with different set of facilities and services. So the interactions between different neighborhoods is key. In the UK, on average, the density level in the UK is around 20-25. especially in typical suburban/rural housing. 2025. Interestingly, Scotland about 1520, England 2025. I have seen some fantastic schemes in England where they have 45 and 75. And I will say something about it later on. But I really like this interesting diagram. To the left-hand side, this is a tower providing 75 units, but no consideration for interactions with the surrounding areas, just very car-oriented. In the middle, again, low-rise, high coverage, but again, just typical housing, what we do in the UK. And to the bottom, medium rise, medium coverage, but there is a common space, a shared gardening, shared spaces, and there is a relationship, interrelationship between private spaces and public spaces. So it is us how we make most of the density to create better places. That's exactly what Jan Gehl tried to advocate, this kind of soft neighborhoods. And I think we have a potential to change the current standards we creating by really giving more attention to density, by placing and planning higher density and uses around transport nodes where it's possible, and diversifying the system. So density should establish a massing strategy that support the spatial hierarchy, and the scale and intensity of buildings should even reflect the importance of shared spaces within spatial framework. Working in sections become very important, especially on terms of how we diversify our activities between making, working, living, and sometimes working. But also density could help enabling walkability and cycling and encourage more active travel. But also gentle density should help support what I call a diverse tenure of housing for a wide demography, cross sections, and to be tenure planned in architectural resolutions. An interesting company in Denmark called Effects Architect, they have a new view for neighborhood to become an ecological habitat, to move away from this concept of suburban, separated private homes. They want to have more reduction of land use, densify the built environment and give more choices, but also see if we can reduce the environmental impact through embracing nature. Embracing nature. I have to admit, guys, people in Scandinavian country, but even in the UK, they are split about this concept. Why? Because they fear that increasing density might interfere with your privacy. So, but we really need to see how we make better use of land to be set aside for nature and also biodiversity. So how do we move from standards housing layouts and having more cluster maybe arrangement and embracing more nature? This is just some of the samples. Effects Architects, but the whole idea creating different housing typologies, different kind of clusterings with different typologies and types. In Europe as well, some cities now, they adopted an interesting concept. For some, it might be rigid. It's called the 330-300 rule. 330-300 rule, in which every citizen should have access to 3 trees from their windows. Every neighborhood, existing or new, should be covered by at least by 30% of that neighborhood. Total area should be covered by tree or green, and every citizen should have access to a green park within the first 300 meters. Yes, 300 meters might be challenging for disabled people or young people. So homes must be engaged with surrounding greenway, if that's possible. That's another interesting, very ambitious concept in Denmark. But as I said, there is fear now that higher density might have impact on privacy. But the whole idea, you free the spaces in between to create shared spaces, to create more green alleyways, and to create more, how do you want to say, informality. Recently, I visited now 2 or 3 times with Robert the Greater Knighton schemes by Proctor Matthew Architects down in Cambridge. And they have really, this by the way, got a lot of attention and a lot of award in Europe and in the UK. The density level is 45. The density level 45. You don't feel intimidated. You don't feel the built environment interfere whatsoever with your privacy. But what I like about it, it was the whole idea about creating shared spaces and shared places. So they activate the role of public realm and they use green infrastructure in a clever way to reduce car speed, but also to hide the cars inside the built environment. The whole idea, freeing spaces and creating shared spaces. But this is another extreme examples in Greenwich, where the density level is 75, my colleagues. This is, yes, high. But why people selected this area to live there? Because it's ease of access to reliable and frequent public transportations, ease of access to reliable and safe cycling, and the whole idea, the spaces in between buildings is about sharing. So you can't speed more than 5 or 10 kilometers an hour. So yes, we must make living in flat is as important as living in a family house. The other questions we raised, me and Ian, is achieving a critical mass of people crucial to the delivery of 20 minutes neighborhood? Absolutely yes. If you don't have a critical mass, I am afraid you cannot create mix of activities. So we need to have a mix of people, to have a mix of activities. In the UK, sometimes to run a local shop, you need sometimes from 1,000 to 2,000 people. To run sometimes a bus stop, you need sometimes 1 to 2 to 3,000 people. So mixing of activity, mixing of everything is key as well to bring a diverse range of people, but also this is about mixing housing and having more social and affordable houses. So how do we facilitate this complexity? Price bandwidth is very key, and we should have a big role to play in here, but also really diversity should create heterogeneous landscape that are attractive, but also sustainable. Otherwise, homogeneous land must be discouraged and heterogeneous land use must be promoted. 3 things we must correlate in what I explained so far. Distance, how far can you walk in 20 minutes? 20 minutes. Destination and intensity of uses is everything you need on daily basis within that distance. And density and intensity of occupations. Are there enough people in the area to support businesses? Robert, I am aware I have to finish. I've got a couple of slides and I will finish shortly. Activity draw peoples to places. Activity creates social opportunity for people. A critical mass is needed to support the required range of services and function that enable people to meet their daily needs. The more diverse or complex the activities on offer, the more people are likely to be attracted to a place. But also, quality matters, the journey and the destination. So yes, the journey and the quality of the destination or amenity, as well as proximity. There is no point now living next to a public park or public space if it is unsafe, dirty, or has antisocial behavior. There is also no point living next to health center if you cannot get an appointment with your GP. There is no point living next to a bus stop if services stop at 6 p.m. in the evening. So quality and the quality of the journey as well matter most. Hence, Jan Gale advocate for those 12 criteria, the importance of protection, comfort, and enjoyment as part of the delivering quality places. Kevin Lynch said one day, nothing is experienced by itself, but always in relation to its surroundings. The sequence of events leading up to it the memory of past experience. This idea how to deal with our neighborhood as a district, its edges, the landmarks, nodes, and paths. Our public spaces is the DNA of our settlements. The way we support that spatial hierarchy of parks, streets, squares, lanes, and mutes. Public spaces really matter most, and they could be a way to create community and establish community. They are common goods, my colleagues. They should create physical cities and informal social culture interactions. It's a place for sharing. This is how the streets, guys, we need more eye on the city. We need more eye on the city. 90% of people preferences and behavior, 90% to do with local level, which is the eye level. What relationship between environment and behavior is assumed in the 20 minutes neighborhood? This is another fundamental questions we share. What relationship between environment and behavior is assumed in the 20 minutes neighborhood? People quickly adapt their travel behavior to suit the context of streets layout and infrastructure they encounter. My colleagues, if you create car-oriented place, people automatically adapt their behavior to that context. And please stop inviting people to buy car. Please, we must make the car the invisible option in the built environment. Because urban and physical forms does influence or change sometimes social behavior, including the patterns of movement. A well-functioning public space realm with rich as well shared places like cafe, canteens, restaurant could build social capital by reinforcing and building social relationship. This provides the gathering places which are of great importance for nourishing sociability and vibrancy of neighborhood. I will be very quick, Robert. This is an interesting example from Jan Gehl. One day he said, people don't change their behavior when you tell them to. People change when the context combine them to. Please stop telling people to use the bike. If the infrastructure is not reliable or not safe or not continuous, people will not use it. It's not enough to say to people, well, biking is good for your health. Let us create the context which allow them to, combine them to. Yes, we have a big role to play, and the built environment have a big role to play in changing people behavior. The example you show is from the city center in Copenhagen. 70% now people on bike. They go on bike for travel, for work and study. Imagine on the bottom of the pictures, between A to B, 13 minutes on bike, 13 minutes. The same A to B is around 40 minutes by car. My goodness, they make it harder for people to use the car. They make it harder. But the key here, the frequency, safety, and affordability. My colleague, the configuration of the built environment, I determine how connected or disconnected or permeable or impermeable. This is what happened. We move from this kind of dense, sophisticated, informal to more becoming low dense. We really need to start visiting the generic structure of urban form, the plot and how the plot series and how the plot meet the streets, and the relationship with the blocks. We have missed this, the importance of this kind of the urban structure and urban morphology and how that's define the relationship with us, but also help people to change their behavior. I don't want to dwell a lot on this. I think my idea is there, but just I need to say we need to diversify our economy. We need to start thinking about the social and public economy at local level, which is to me very important to make neighborhood distinct in terms of identity, in terms of context. but also making it resilient. Not everything's about big economy or commercial economy. Local economy matter most as a way to build social capital, but also create resilient places. This kind of sharing economy, a healthy economy based on hybrid economic activities, would be really include the whole idea of creation, production, trading, and consumptions by different people and different organizations at local level. Collaboration is really at the heart of it. The importance, how do we encounter our places? The senses, the importance of a human senses and pleasing senses. It's all about being small, slow environment, human, everyday culture, quality of life. But we need to understand places evolve and we evolve. The way we shape the physical will affect our perceptions, but also will affect our decisions. So we need to perceive urban design and neighborhood at neighborhood level as a template for long-term change. Neighborhood to me is a cumulative layers of how we shape the physical in order to shape the perceptions and decisions. I just thought I would like to finish with this positive slide as well. How now in Utrecht, they create a barcode to measure everything's in the neighborhood. Underground, on the ground, and above the grounds. Everything's from water, geothermal, electricity, housing, foundation, waste, cycling, green, blue. And they want to establish this formula for every single neighborhood in Utrecht. But this will take time, my colleague, and should be an iterative process. We learn from it, but it may take 10 to 20 years, and it does require different relationship. This is not only about professionals or local authorities. This is about as well community groups and cities activists, and the interrelationship between both of them, the top down and the bottom up. And we as a professionals, we should be the mediator between the two and how to bring the two together. But we need to acknowledge community is not homogeneous mass, but comprised of individuals with different levels of knowledge, different needs, and even expectation. My conclusion, we need to view towns and neighborhoods as an ecological habitat, neighborhood as a different layering of physical perceptions and decisions. You cannot build sustainable neighborhood from scratch. It may take 2 to 3 generations. It is an iterative and learning planning process. It is multifaceted approach, not just about physical, but also place-making important. It does require bottom-up and top-down. It really depends on trust and building trust between teams and different members. To me, future neighborhood and towns have opportunity to think and act differently. And we need to diversify teams to see those blind spots. And I would like to finish by saying the betterness of poor quality remains long after the sweetness of low price is forgotten. And the greater danger is not that we aim too high and miss, but that we aim too low and reach it. Apologies if I went on and on, Robert, and thanks very much for everyone.
Thank you very much, Husam. That was an absolute tour de force, a presentation on such an important and very relevant subject. And also congratulations to the people who have been putting in comments and ideas in chat. I think we've got just about 15 minutes of discussion. And I was wondering whether we could pick up some of the ideas that have been raised in chat. And in the course of that, maybe invite some people who have raised those suggestions to expand on them. And I suppose people have said that these are not new ideas. The whole idea of a 20-minute neighborhood, it's something that has existed throughout history. Perforce, life has been very much centered around walking. So the question is, why aren't we producing 20-minute neighborhoods now? Somers Sanglu You mentioned old ideas not being implemented. Phil Smith, talking about housing building PLC, they are set up to build suburban sprawl. And this is a problem that house builders build houses, retail companies, they build shops, individual private sector enterprises, they look for business accommodation. What there is missing is an organisation that ensures that we build towns as opposed to single-use areas. Alice Goodall talked about the powerless of the planning system. So I wonder if Solmaz, Phil, or Alice is still here, would you like to switch on microphones and expand a little bit about the points you said, and then Husam can comment, and then perhaps we can move on to solutions as to how we could get this machinery that would produce 20-minute neighbourhoods and new development. And could I put John Duffy and David Booth on notice to be ready to jump in when that time comes? So, Solmaz or Alice or Phil, are you still around? Would you like to expand on what you put in chat?
I am still here. Hello.
You mentioned the powerlessness of the planning system.
I did. I work in local government. I'm an urban designer, so I wish I wasn't making that comment, but I see it all too much, and I suppose being more positive, I don't necessarily think the planning system is powerless at the moment, but I think we don't always use the powers we do have to the greatest effect. I think I said a bit later on, all too often local authorities are kind of being reactive to applications from developers, and it's developer led, and actually LPAs could take a lot more of a proactive approach. I think the new policies out there now around design coding and design guidance go a lot way towards encouraging that, and I think it's for LPAs to try and be as proactive as they can in implementing that, to lead this different approach and lead regeneration and plan a lot more comprehensively. We have a garden community in my local authority, which is, I think, one of the possible solutions, although that raises endless challenges on its own.
John Duffy, would you like to expand on what you mentioned about defining the 20-minute neighbourhood so that it can be written into planning policies, if you're still around?
Yeah, I'm still here. Yes. Can you hear me?
Yeah.
Firstly, thanks to Husam. It's always a pleasure to watch him give his talks. They're always, as I think, as described, a tour de force. And that's one of the things that the Husam has given us a fantastic, incredibly broad and incredibly wide insight into his sort of research and what he sees 20-minute neighbourhoods actually are. In Scotland, we actually have a policy which is going to be implemented in the new national planning framework. And that unfortunately amounts to probably less than 2 sides of a sheet of A4 in terms of how we actually begin to define what a 20-minute neighbourhood actually is. And without that kind of, without that sort of definition, and without those, I suppose the kind of the instructions or the code to operationalise the 20-minute neighbourhood, then, and without that definition, we're not going to be able to actually look at the efficacy going forward of how this policy is going to be implemented. I'm looking on screen, a separate screen, which is and I think I mentioned it in my comment, and it's a new study from the International Journal of Behavioural Nutrition and Physical Activity, who have studied the Melbourne's 20-minute neighbourhood, which essentially Scotland as a country we've kind of nicked that as a sort of policy. And their findings have actually said, well, actually, do you know what? In terms of the policy definition, you know, in terms of if you know what the 20-minute neighbourhood is constituting everyday needs and services, it's pretty much remained on the level. In other words, the policy which has been in effect now since 2014 hasn't actually changed a heck of a much. Now, as I say, this is actually a very, very recent study, and it seems to sort of fly in the face of this kind of, you know, Niagara of sort of positivity around 20-minute neighbourhoods. And I think there's a lot to be positive about. But as I say, when it comes down to things like how to operationalise it within policy, it's different to, as I say, the kind of the theorising and the almost the normative kind of stuff that we quote unquote we ought to be doing. Sorry, that's slightly kind of scattergun, but that's
Husam, would you like to comment on this in terms of how to get policies that can be written into the planning that are going to be effective and are going to bring about new development that affects this concept of a 20-minute neighbourhood?
Hi, John. Hi, thanks for the comment. Totally agree with you, John. For me, there are three set of issues here from Scottish perspective, but if I may say, very relevant to the English context as well. You have the existing neighborhood, the one built over the last 30, 40 years. How do you really deal? Because that's, to me, the 20 minutes neighborhood is really very different from the new one. So you've got the new one, but also you have the challenge with the rural context / some suburbia where you really have very, very few people or very, very low dense. So what worry me, if I may say, John, yes, policy is fine. Some guidelines is fine, but it's so easy for some people to use it as a technocratic exercise. Like some people now perceive 20 minutes neighborhood, or it's purely about just the transportation and linking A to B. And to me, we have forgetting the concept of this is about creating places for people. I have to admit, I really don't care whether it is called the 20 minutes neighborhood or ecological neighborhood or sustainable neighborhood or even compact neighborhood. They are really the same things. But to me, it's about that localism agenda. How do we activate it? And it's not going to be a straightforward answers. Now, there are lack of skills, John, I could tell you. There are lack of skills. If you look at the current local authorities structure in England, in Scotland, you barely see a lot of, how do you want me to say, quality urban designers. Urban designers know how to deliver it or how to understand it spatially and so on. I am very worried about it. Because yes, it does need different teams and whole system thinking, but also there is lack of skills. And John, if you allow me to say, what worries me about it, there is a lot of people in the UK now talk about the concept. But what worries me, how do we get the private sector and the market system engaged with us? How do we get them on board? Because those people are responsible for delivery. And what worries me,
a very good question to raise. This really goes back to the foundation of the planning system. So we have in England, the housing, the Town Planning, Housing Act of 1909, introduced because the current system of codes was producing basically residential development built down to the minimum requirements demanded by the codes. So this question remains that has been posed. Say Bill Smith, Housing Building PLC are set up to build suburban sprawl. They're there to build houses. And maybe that RTPI location and development study suggests that there are unambiguous measures, a mix of amenities accessible by walking within a minimum amount of time. That is quite easy to measure, as has been demonstrated by their report. Can I ask David Booth, you mentioned that we've got clear standards that we don't use. Sue James of the Trees and Design Action Group, who unfortunately has left, she also raised the issue about leadership. And from that, one can extend to the public. Do the public want this? Are politicians prepared to lead? And what are those clear standards? Why don't we, if we have clear standards, why don't we use them? David, would you, if you're still here, would you like to comment?
Yeah, hello, and thank you, Husam, for the very passionate delivery there. Really interesting, and thanks to everyone else who's put links in as well. I spent a lot of time just going backwards and forwards, having a look at links and following up things so I can pass them on for my students as well. My response really was to do with the 330-300, which intrigues me because I've not heard about that. And I will be having a look for that follow-up presentation, which someone else posted. I'm really a little bit more concerned from my professional background as a landscape architect that the standards that we have long had, so for example, the 6 acre standards, which were, decades ago, we now have the beyond the 6 acre standards produced by Fields in Trust. And we also have the Woodland Trust standards, which by their nature are looking at accessibility to woodland. But we also have a long established set of standards from Natural England, the angst standards, as we commonly call them, accessible green space. All three of which are slightly different, but actually very similar in the sense that they are suggesting that what we should allow for at the early planning stages, the spatial planning stages, the master planning stages, when we're allocating for dwellings and for employment land, etc., we tend not to allocate very effectively for the green open space in terms of its proximity, its walkability, as well as per capita head, how much space we should have. All three of these standards do that. And I'd just like to see us use them a lot more frequently, more effectively, and to see the calculations from them actually drawn out more transparently so that we can actually say, well, actually green infrastructure is needed to accommodate this amount of space, because I don't think we do that. And then, of course, what we need to do is make sure that in some ways we offer some kind of protection to that green space once it's allocated, whether it's woodland, whether it's a leap, neat, lap, mugger, whatever it might be, or whether it's some generic kind of recreation space. But I'd encourage people to look at all three of those sets of standards. I've posted them in the chat if anybody wants to pick them up.
Can I say one thing, Robert, if you allow me? If you allow me.
Please do.
I would love to see how can we build 2 or 3 exemplars in this country where we aspire to. And there are down in England, I could name a few, but we need to show more exemplars to the community if we want to affect their behavior and create cultural change. For example, in Scotland, to me, yes, we talk about policy, we talk about guidelines, and some people now start buying into this, by the way. Buying into it. I know local community groups, by the way, the differences to me between 20 minutes neighborhood and compact neighborhood. Interestingly now, local community groups down in England and Scotland start talking about it, including, by the way, some children and so on. But we need to show them real examples so they aspire to. And this is what I like about city like Aarhus or Copenhagen or Freiburg or Utrecht. It's so important we test different things and we diversify what we offer to the community. Once you start diversifying what you offer, then you will get different, how do you want me to say, different people, using the city or the towns differently. And the biggest challenge to me, I have to admit, it's still a big question mark. How do I get the market engaged with us? How do we get them engaged? Because if you think about the big house builders in the UK in general, they are around 7, 8, or 12 of them maximum. They have 1 or 2 template. I mean it. They have 1 or 2 or 3 template. They use this templates everywhere for the last 30 years. How do we change this template? How do we diversify this template? It is still big questions to me, really still. And if I may say, we need ethically to be confident enough to say no to shitty design, if you allow me.
We're getting close to the end. Would anybody like to ask any subsequent questions? I think Juliet Bidgood, if you're still here, you raised the issue of how to create 20-minute neighbourhoods in existing areas, and you mentioned densification. Are you still around?
Yes, I'm still here.
Oh, very good.
Well, thank you for a really inspiring presentation. I mean, I think in the UK, Cambridge for me is one of the places that's done the best job in terms of getting their sort of strategic planning right so that they can create more interesting places. But also it seems to me very much about land ownership, because we just have one model of land ownership. And it would just be really great to see local authorities working in partnership with communities, maybe. I was just sort of always wondering about what the role of design coding could be in the future if certain areas in agreement with communities were identified for some kind of community retrofit. And if you could if you could kind of zone areas for areas of innovation or something like that. It does feel like we need to create new governance and land ownership models, which is sort of why I was interested in what's going to happen to all these low density suburbs that we've created that are unsustainable. Some of them in future, like in 10 or 20 years time, will become ripe for remodeling. And that seems interesting too, the idea of neighbourhood retrofit. I think that's what and different kinds of land ownership.
Well, thank you very much for making that point. And of course, we must remember that prior to 1950, the suburbs that were created were largely dependent on public transport, walking and cycling. Maybe they're not so densely populated as they once were. Alan Thompson has had his hand up for a long time. Would you like to join in?
Thanks, Robert. Yeah. Two observations. Thanks, Husam. Amazing presentation. Really thought-provoking. Seems to me that we've got two challenges if we're looking for implementation. The first one is to do with new settlements and building things from scratch. And the second one is this retrofitting. I'm going to park the retrofitting one for a second. So, but the new settlements, it would seem pretty straightforward what ought to be done. And that's to come up with a clear set of parameters for what a 20-minute neighbourhood is and for what these sustainable communities are. Should be pretty clear whether a proposal meets these parameters or doesn't meet them. And then the NPPF needs updating to say that they must meet them. Otherwise, they shouldn't be granted planning approval. I think it's really that simple. So there's a challenge to the industry to come up with a set of parameters and then beg the government to include it in the next iteration of the NPPF. I think that's simple as that. Husam, does that make sense?
Absolutely. Alan, if I may ask you, you and colleagues, how do you feel about this issue of service delivery? If you look at it, every city council now, because to make the resources limited, they invest in large lorries and large vehicles to access neighborhoods, including emergency, including fire and so on. So do you have any thought? I really don't have a magic answers. Sorry, I am asking you now.
There are some councils who use smaller scaled down vehicles, refuse collection vehicles with rear wheel steering and that sort of stuff to enable a tighter street pattern to be used. But I think new construction of houses, new development, it's something like less than 1% of the total built environment. The problem that we've got is what to do with the existing built environment, and that already exists. I think we've gone over the 1402 mark. I'm just going to post the RTPI's mix of amenities list. They looked at 9 areas: primary schools, secondary schools, further education, GP surgeries, employment, centres, small, medium and large, and town centres, and maybe a couple of others. And as Alan said, it's not complicated. It's a simple question. Is there a primary school within 20 minutes walk? Is there a secondary school within 20 minutes walk or cycle ride? We don't need to make this a hugely frenzied and complicated thing and start panicking. And it's very, very simple. Can you walk there? Can you cycle there in 20 minutes? And does that apply to all members of society? Elderly people, children, women who may be more concerned about personal security and crime than others. So it's 1403. Husam, would you like to make a concluding remark? And then we'll all go off and have a cup of
Robert,
tea.
if you allow me, there are two, they raised their hand. You want us to take them quickly? I promise you the last
Go on
two.
then.
Would you mind?
Of course, yes.
Shall I go first? Hope you can hear me. I was making the comment about what I called big and small cogs, and I think that was around the fact that sometimes when we talk about all these issues, we seem to almost talk of them on a level as if they're all sort of an equal rainbow, but actually some of them might be bigger, some of them might need to come first, and critically, you may need more than one to come first together, if that makes sense. It's not just let's do this and then everything else follows. There might be 4 or 5 things that all simultaneously need to happen for anything to improve. And then there might be further subsequent things which will also enhance that improvement. So that was my question. Are there critical, basic things that all need to happen? And I mentioned Jane Jacobs because she cites 4 things that all need to happen in order to make any headway with this. So it was just to see your thoughts on that. Thank you.
Totally agree with you with what Jane Jacobs said. There are certain things needs to happen in the place to activate really the 20 minutes neighborhood. And to me, the experience is key, the accessibility and the proximity and the diversity. You know, if you think about it, if I may say, I work now from home, yes, but where I work, I am lucky enough, I live in a very affluent neighborhood. I am only 5 minutes away from a community anchors, community library, and an active street, plus a green park. So I do feel confident to stay at home and work from home, plus a very high quality internet speed. Thank you.
Natalie.
The last one, please.
Very last one. First of all, thank you for this talk.
There's no pressure. This has got to be the best comment of the lot.
Well, I just have a question that you've already touched upon in terms of I'm a civil engineer, so I come from a different perspective. And I must say, well, we overlap when it comes to design processes. In civil engineering in particular, design projects are usually profit-driven. So when you introduce notions that are more complex or fuzzy, and they're more, I don't want to say abstract, but they're non-technical in a sense where projects cannot go forward as smoothly because certainty isn't clear. The uncertainties are a lot, obviously, and they cannot cost it as accurately as they would if they were to abide with these 1 or 2 templates that you've mentioned earlier. And so, like, my question is, how do you convince top-down authority decision makers into adopting these frameworks that are more fuzzy and they're less technical? And obviously, because they're more fuzzy, there's more cost to it as well. So how do you convince people that are profit-driven with such costly notions in design?
I think by showing them evidence.
Okay, how?
It's not about how showing them evidence. How do you make most of what you have? How do you make things could be better? I now face a challenge, if I may say, in one of my area here in Dundee. My students show the private sector some good examples. I mean it. Show them a good example, how we could make things better or different. And now on the back of it, the private sector now come back to us. Oh, guys, we are really convinced with your evidence. Could you please show us? Could you please help us? I think raising awareness, yes, we need to educate politicians. We need to educate our market. We need to transform the market. To me, key, how do we bring the market? The market is not our enemy, no at all. In the UK, we need to bring the market with us as a real partner, by showing them an evidence. And let me say to you, there is fantastic examples in Cambridge where the local authority in Cambridge work with the private sector, with a very genius architect and landscape architect, and deliver some fantastic schemes. It can work, but you need the evidence.
But like, I'm sorry, it's a follow-up question and it's going to be quick. But like by evidence, do you mean like quality of life statistics?
Not necessarily. Like, for example, sometimes delivering a bit more density, more dense, that's to me win-win. It could be, if it is about place and place making, you generate maybe more units for the private sector. But you have to as well bear in mind that you have to show the private sector, look, delivering more units may require more investment in the infrastructure. So creating that trust could be really very key for it. It's not an easy answer, if I may tell you, but we need to educate them. We need to show them different way of thinking.
So basically, you're relying upon singularities in the decision-making strategy and their personal intentions. Like basically, like if the intention of this decision maker was for him or her to deliver more sustainable impact.
I don't believe in singularity. I believe in collective decision, collectivism. Working in a team, working collectively, not in one or two person taking decision. No, at all. That's not what I am advocating. I am advocating joined up thinking between different teams. Why? Because no one owned the 20 minutes neighborhood. It is a shared concept between even community and local community and practitioners.
Thank you.
But we need education is really big, and education starts from school level, university level, but even practitioners and politicians, if I may say.
It's been an excellent question on which to end. It's sort of the $50,000 question: who profits? And I think, as Husam said earlier in his presentation, there are some developers who build, sell, and then clear off, and they don't have a long-term interest. Whereas so many of the exemplar developments that we have, there is a landowner who is intended to be there for the long term and to obtain profits that accrue from long term, from quality and sustainability. Maybe we need to discuss these issues at a future event. So let's have a think. Anyway, may I, on behalf of us all, thank you, Sam, for spending so much time and giving a brilliant presentation. And thank you all for joining in and for such intelligent and insightful comments that you put in. So there's been absolutely no ranting or vitriol or anything like that. Let's hope we meet again soon.